I'm getting worried about how much time I've taken. Well, actually, I'm not getting worried about how much time I've taken. I don't care. I'm looking at my watch to pretend that I care. And since I don't know when I started, I can't figure out how long I've been talking. At some point, the war in Iraq will come to an end. At some point, the United States will do in Iraq what it did in Vietnam after saying, we will never leave, we will never leave, we will win, we will stay the course, we will not cut and run. At some point, the United States is going to have to cut and run from Iraq, you see. And they're going to do it because the sentiment is going to grow and grow and grow in this country. And because more and more GIs are going to come back from Iraq and say, we're not going back again. And because they're going to have more and more trouble supplying the armed forces in Iraq. And because the parents of young people are going to say more and more, we are not going to allow our young people to go to war for Beth, and Halliburton. We're not going to do that. So at some point, yes, at some point we are going to do what they say we mustn't do, cut and run. We don't have to cut and run. We cut and walk. Cut and swim. Cut, but get out as fast as you can. Because we're not doing any good there. We're not helping the situation. We're not bringing peace. We're not bringing democracy. We're not bringing stability. We're bringing violence and chaos. We're provoking all of that, and people are dying every day. When a Democratic leader says, well, I think we ought to withdraw by, May 14th, 2000 and whatever, Yeah, every day from now until then, more people will die, and more people will lose arms or legs or become blinded. And so that is intolerable. And so we have to do everything we can. And in the case of Vietnam, at a certain point, the government realized it could not carry on the war. GIs were coming back from Vietnam and turning against the war. They couldn't bring people to join the ROTC. Too many people were running to Canada. Too many people were not signing up for the draft. Finally, it had to do away with the draft. They were losing the support of the population. They were losing support of the military. And at a certain point, no. And something like that is going to happen. And the sooner we help it happen, of course, the better. The more we go into the high schools, there's a very practical thing that everybody can do, and that is go to their local high schools and make sure that all the parents and all the kids in high schools understand that they don't have to give their information to the military recruiters, you see, and more have teams of people who will counter the propaganda of the military recruiters. They are having trouble. They're getting desperate about recruiting for the military, going to all sorts of lengths, and of course they're concentrating. They send their military recruiters into the poorest schools because they know that the working class kids are the most vulnerable, the most needy, the ones who they need an education, they need a skill, and so on. And so they're trying to prey on the working class. Eugene Debs said, if you don't mind my quoting Eugene Debs, but Eugene Debs said in a speech during World War I, which landed him in jail, the master class has always started the wars. The working class has always fought the wars. Of course, that has been true all the way. So we will at some point get out of Iraq. But I want to suggest one thing. We have to think beyond Iraq and even beyond Iran. We don't want to have to struggle against this war and then against that war and then against the next war. We don't have an endless succession of anti-war movements. It gets tiring. And we need to think and talk and educate about the abolition of war itself. You see, I was talking to my barber the other day, because we always discuss world politics, and he's totally politically unpredictable, as most barbers are. You see. He said, Howard, he said, you know, you and I disagree on many things, but on one thing we agree. War solves nothing. And I thought, yeah, it's not hard for people to grasp that. And there again, history is useful. We've had a history of war after war after war after war. What have they solved? What have they done? Even World War II, the good war, the war in which I volunteered, the war in which I dropped bombs, the war after which, I received a letter from General Marshall, General of Generals, a letter addressed personally to me and to 16 million others, in which he said, we've won the war, it will be a new world. Well, of course, it wasn't a new world. It hasn't been a new world. War after war after war. I came out of that war, the war in which I volunteered, the war in which I was an enthusiastic bombardier. I came out of that war with certain ideas which just developed gradually at the end of the war, ideas about war. One, that war corrupts everybody who engages in it. War poisons everybody who engages in it. You start off as the good guys, as we did in World War II. They're the bad guys, they're the fascists. What could be worse? So they're the bad guys, we're the good guys. And as the war goes on, the good guys begin behaving like the bad guys. You can trace this back to the Peloponnesian War. You can trace it back to the good guy, the Athenians, and the bad guys, the Spartans. And after a while, the Athenians become ruthless and cruel like the Spartans. And we did that in World War II. We, after Hitler committed his atrocities, we committed our atrocities. Our killing of 600,000 civilians in Japan, our killing of probably an equal number of civilians in Germany, they weren't Hitler, they weren't Toja, they were just ordinary people like we are ordinary people living in a country that is a marauding country, and they were living in countries that were marauding countries, and they were caught up in whatever it was and afraid to speak up. And I came to the conclusion, yes, war poisons everybody. And war, this is an important thing to keep in mind, that when you go to war against a tyrant, and this was one of the claims, we're going to get rid of Saddam Hussein, which was cost nonsense. Did our government care that Saddam Hussein tyrannized his own people? We helped him tyrannize his people. We helped him gas the Kurds. We helped him accumulate weapons of mass destruction, really. But when you go to war against a tyrant, the people you kill in the war are the victims of the tyrant. The people we killed in Germany were the victims of Hitler. The people we killed in Japan were the victims of the Japan Imperial Army, And the people who die in wars are more and more and more people who are not in the military. You may know this about the different ratio of civilian to military deaths in war, how in World War I, 10 military dead for 1 civilian dead. In World War II, it was 50-50, half military, half civilian. In Vietnam, it was 70% civilian and 30% military. And in the wars since then, it's 80% and 85% civilian. I became friends a few years ago with an Italian war surgeon named Gino Strada. He spent 10 years, 15 years doing surgery on war victims all over the world, and he wrote a book about it, Green Parrots, Diary of a War Surgeon. He said, in all the patients that he operated on in Iraq and Afghanistan and everywhere, 85% of them were civilians, 1/3 of them children. If you understand, and if people understand, and if you spread the word of this understanding, that whatever is told to you about war and how we must go to war and whatever the threat is or whatever the goal is, democracy or liberty, it will always be a war against children. They're the ones who will die in large numbers. The war, well, Einstein said this after World War I. He said, war cannot be humanized, it can only be abolished. War has to be abolished, you know. And it's, I know it's a long shot. I understand that. But you have to, when something is a long shot, but it has to be done, you have to start doing it. Just as the ending of slavery in this country in the 1830s was a really long shot, but people stuck at it, and it took 30 years, but slavery was done away with, and we can see this again and again. So we have a job to do. We have lots of things to do. One of the things we can learn from history is that history is not only a history of things inflicted on us by the powers that be. History is also a history of resistance. It's a history of people who endure tyranny for decades, but who ultimately rise up and overthrow the dictator. We've seen this in country after country, surprise after surprise. Rulers who seem to have total control, they suddenly wake up one day and there are 1 million people in the streets, and they pack up and leave. This has happened in the Philippines and in Yemen, all over, in Nepal. 1 million people in the streets, and then the ruler has to get out of the way. This is what we're aiming for in this country. Everything we do is important. Every little thing we do, every picket line we walk on, every letter we write, every act of civil disobedience we engage in, any recruiter that we talk to, any parent that we talk to, any GI that we talk to, any young person that we talk to, anything we do in class, outside of class, everything we do in the direction of a different world is important, even though at the moment they seem futile, because that's how change comes about. Change comes about when millions of people do little things which at certain points in history come together, and then something good and something important happens. Thank you.